of videos ago, I said that I was reading this book. It's by Richard Rohr, Falling Upward: A Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life. And I said I would update you on it when I finished it, which I have. And so if you're interested in hearing about this book, I would say that it is more a book about probably the second half of life as opposed to the first half. However, don't assume that you are not in the second half of life, because it really has more to do with what is going on inside of you as opposed to what is going on with you physically. So, and that's often precipitated by some kind of an event. So it could be that you are in, or looking at the second half of life and you're wondering, okay, what's next? In my case, a few years ago, my parents were both very sick and I was caring for them. I had 3 children at home and my life looks very different now. My parents have both passed away and I have 2 children who are already out of college and are gainfully employed, and I have a 17-year-old. So life is beginning to look very different for me, and you may find that it's looking different for you as well. So if you think that you would like to hear a little bit about what's next, I think this could be a great book for you. It is not a book about the things that you do in the second half of life. I mean, yes, we do begin to think more about our mortality and end of life issues, but it's not about cleaning out your house. It's not about doing your bucket list. Again, it is more about the change that is going on inside of you. So if that sounds like something that's interesting to you, and like something that you are facing, I'll hopefully share what this book has to offer. I think it's very helpful. And sadly, some people never seem to really make the shift from the first half of life to the second half of life. Some people go their whole lives without doing that spiritual internal work that needs to happen. The author tells about a study that was done on post-World War II Japan with young men who came back, who were soldiers, and they had a hard time reacclimating to civilian life. And so they started this ritual where they would pull all of these men together and use this as a time of affirmation and say, you have served your country well. You have done a great job, and we thank you. We are so grateful for the service that you have provided. But now the war is over, and it is time to return to civilian life. It's time to move on to other things. We need you to be a man who serves in a different kind of world now. And this was just such an affirming time for them to hear, okay, it's time to make this shift. It's time to change. And he goes on to say that, these types of rituals are so important and something that in our culture, we just do not have. We do not mark the transitions in our lives with rituals. We are ritually starved, he says. And I was thinking about that. I thought, I have a friend who recently sent her last daughter off to college, and she said she was kind of down about it and said, I feel like I was just fired from a job that I really loved. And I get that, and you may be feeling like that as well, whether it's you're retiring or you are becoming an empty nester. But how much would it mean if somebody said to us, or even if we just took the time to stop and say to ourselves, you did a good job. You were a great mom. You raised your children as best as you knew how, or you did your work to the best of your ability. But now it's time to look to what lays ahead, what's in front of you, and how are you going to spend your time, and what are you going to give yourself to now? And that loyal soldier that we begin our lives with, often, most of us do, it's a good voice. It's the voice that teaches us things like discipline and honor and following rules and integrity, it really gives us a ground to stand on. Rohr uses the terminology loyal soldier, as in our first half of life, we listen to that voice. And sometimes we mistake that voice for the voice of God, when in reality, it is probably the voice of various authorities that we've had in our lives, whether that's parents or grandparents or teachers or coaches. And those are good voices. Those are voices from our past that we have chosen to listen to because they've given us good advice. But in the second half of life, it is time to perhaps discharge that loyal soldier, as he says. That's his terminology, and to begin to listen to a deeper voice, the voice that speaks of surrender and trust and love. And this is a voice that in our second half of life, we need to learn to listen to and obey. The first half of life, the loyal soldier keeps us safe, keeps us from running out in the road, so to speak. But the second half of life, we learn to hear a different voice. A lot of times, this shift in our lives happens when we find ourselves in the middle of a situation that we just absolutely cannot control. We don't understand it, we can't control it, and we learn and accept the fact that life is messy. And that is called surrender. When we say, Lord, I do not understand this. I don't understand why this is happening, but I know that you're here in the midst of it, and I will trust you. I will trust you to hold me through it. And that is when we can accept the peace. You know, I think about the verses where Jesus says, come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest for your souls. And I think really second half of life, people understand this so much better because we understand that we can't control everything. There are just things in my life that I have to just let go of. The author says, and I think it's probably true, that eventually, if we live long enough, we all go through a struggle where we will not win. No matter what we do, we think we do all the right things to bring about a positive outcome, and it just doesn't work. And really, we have to, this is necessary, because how else would we grow? We would never willfully choose to place ourselves in a painful situation, even if we knew that on the other side of it, we would be so much wiser. We would be so much more mature. We just wouldn't do that. So when we go through these times of pain, that's when we're able to say, I'm stepping out of the driver's seat and I'm getting into the passenger seat, and I'm, again, as I said earlier, we're letting go of control. And that is when I've had a couple of situations in my life that were just so painful, where I felt like my heart was being pulled out of my chest. And those are the times when I fell on my knees the hardest, where I prayed the absolute hardest and said, Lord, I can't do anything about this. You have to be the one to do it. And really, you know, more than anything, God cares about having a relationship with us more than about what we do. He knows. I mean, if we look through the pages of Scripture, we see that people are constantly messing up, and God is constantly forgiving over and over. And I know that's true in my own life, because really, we understand that He cares more about the relationship with us than He does about actually what we are doing and not doing. And as Rohr says, I thought it was an interesting way to say it, the people what really bothers God the most is not the people who sin, but the people who don't realize they sin. The people who don't realize that they absolutely need God. So when this happens, I have learned when this happens, where I'm able to, quote unquote, step out of the driver's seat, you know, you learn to become less self-aware. And this is a second half of life thing. You don't think so much about what I'm doing. I don't think so much about what I'm doing or how I'm looking to other people. I think less about myself, and I begin to think more about God. And let me just say real quickly, when I say I understand that I'm still on this journey, I have not arrived. I just want to clear that up really fast, but I am moving that way. And what I recognize, the grace in this, is that as I do that, I am so much more forgiving of myself. I am so much more aware of the fact that I'm not perfect, and that's okay. It's okay. But the second part of that is I'm so much more forgiving of other people. I see other people and I see that they are on their journey and think, I've been there. I was once 20 years old and I once acted that way. So, when in this time of life, those things don't matter to us as much because we've been there. And when we're not thinking about those things so much. So Rohr goes on to talk about in his book, obviously, and especially if you are well into the second half of your life, you know that darkness still does exist and anxiety still exists and maybe even more of it. But our capacity to hold the anxieties, our capacity to hold the hurts, it changes, it increases, and we're able to hold those things easier than we used to be able to hold them. And we, in this stage of life and in the fact that we are living more closely with God, everything that in the past would have been very abrasive to us, that would have irritated us, we're able to set it aside and say, Lord, your spirit flow through me. It's not about me, it's about you. One thing I loved that he said that I thought that is really true. He said, the first half of life is very much kind of characterized by, if you think about the 10 commandments, these are the things you do, these are the things you don't do. The second half of life, it's more about the Beatitudes. It's not about what you do, it's about who you become. And I recently taught a group of children, small children, and I was charged with teaching them about the Beatitudes, and I realized that's really hard to do because they are much more black and white. Do not steal, do not lie, treat your parents with honor. And now it's more about blessed are those who are meek. Blessed are those who are pure in heart. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. So the second half of life is characterized more about the person you're becoming and less about what you're doing. I kind of wondered as I was reading if there are people who actually, by his definition, never move into the second half of life. And by the time I finished, I thought, yes, there probably are. There are people who go into their second half of lives and even go ahead and even pass away as angry and bitter and hurt people. They have never learned to let go of the hurts in their lives, the things that have hurt them. So as I said before, I have not arrived, but I really do believe that the second half of life can be the richest part of our lives, the best part of our lives. And so I hope I am moving in that way. And if you are at a place in your life where you are thinking about these types of issues, I encourage you to pick up this book. There's so much wisdom in it, and I really have only just barely touched on it. Richard Rohr is a Franciscan priest, and he is I think right now in his early 80s. He was in his 70s when he wrote this, but so much wisdom. And it is not a book that you're going to sit down and read in a couple of hours. I read a little bit, just a small section each morning before I read my Bible, and reflected on what he was saying and thought about which parts of it I could accept, which parts I had to let go of, because there are some things in it that I think, I don't know about that. But if you are looking for a spiritual exercise that will begin moving you into this second half of life, this is a book that I would recommend for you. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I will see you in a future video.